sort of say it's the most simplest framework, just 3 C's. So you've got to be confident, you've got to start making some commitments, and you've got to keep it consistent. And where I've really come unstuck is where I've pushed boards to go for commitments when they haven't been confident in what they're talking about. So sometimes it needs a bit of time, and I feel like the times when you try to jump ahead and rush, it costs you more in the end because you end up backtracking and so forth. So I've tried to keep it really simple, and there's just 3 parts of the book.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Social Hotelier podcast with me, Sam-Erik. Let me start by reading a couple of testimonials about my guest who authored How to Build Sustainability into Your Business Strategy. I wish Lee had written this book 25 years ago when I was building young sustainability manager in larger corporate. It would have saved me a lot of wasted effort to have had this totally comprehensive and yet tightly written how-to guide on hand rather than have to make it up as we did. This book is like having an experienced sustainability ninja master by your side. So these are testimonials about the book, How to Build Sustainability into Your Business Strategy. It's a practical, comprehensive guide for business leaders. My guest today is Lee Stewart, a sustainability professional with over 20 years of corporate experience, dedicated to helping businesses become a force for good and create a better world. Welcome, Lee, and thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks, Sam-Erik.
So let's get started. First, I think for our audience to get some background, can you tell me a bit about your professional experience and what inspired you to dedicate your life to helping businesses become a force for good and create a better world, in fact?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's really great to be here. So my journey in sustainability really began over 20 years ago when I realized the profound impact that businesses could have on our world. And I'm not just talking in terms of profit, but also in contributing to a more sustainable and equitable future. So over the years, I've worked across various sectors, helping companies not only meet their sustainability goals, but also help transform business models to be more resilient and responsible. And the inspiration I get actually comes from seeing the tangible difference that a well-integrated strategy around sustainability can make. So I'm not just improving environmental outcomes, which you might always think about, but also enhancing business performance, stakeholder trust, and overall benefit to the communities where these businesses operate.
Yeah, that's very important. We tend so often that we are focusing on one single thing, and then community at the end actually is a very important factor. Maybe one of the most, I believe it's one of the most important factors in the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Just to get a little bit the basics out of this definitions, how do you define sustainability strategy?
Yeah, so look, there's a lot of definitions out there. So really, I've tried to simplify everything. So really, it's essentially a roadmap that looks to align companies' operations and goals with long-term environmental, social, and economic sustainability. So it includes identifying the key areas where the business can make a positive impact, setting measurable goals, and embedding these goals within the existing business operations and strategy. So it's about creating value not just for shareholders, but for all stakeholders, your employees, your customers, your consumers, communities, all the other things through your actual supply chain as well.
So how does sustainability affect business? I mean, how do you see it from that experience that you have?
So it can affect business in many different ways, from reducing operational costs through things like energy efficiency, to opening up new markets, which have helped a lot of companies work on through sustainable products. So it helps drives innovation, competitiveness. Additionally, I see a strong sustainability strategy actually enhances brand reputation, can help attract and retain the top talent, and can also help mitigate risks related to environmental or regulatory constraints, especially as we look at global supply chains disruption as well. But ultimately, it's actually about future-proofing the business in a rapidly changing world.
Yeah, I mean, we hear and I see so much about, particularly in the hospitality, that there's that greenwash, and they tend to say that yes, we are a sustainable company. In fact, now we're talking about regeneration and creating more value. And when you ask, well, specifically, what are you doing? Well, we are not using plastic straws anymore in the operation. And if that's, I mean, this is maybe taking a little bit of a sarcastic approach to this, but have you noticed this? Or I'm sure you have. What is your comment to that kind of thinking? It is used as more like a marketing ploy.
Yeah, first of all, if you're doing that now, your time's limited. Consumers are getting more savvy. Regulators are getting on top of things. Um, the key thing I think about is honesty and transparency. You've got to. Not everyone has solved all these problems in sustainability. So be honest about the problems you're facing. Say we're trying to phase out single-use plastics. We're starting with in our hotels. I've worked with some hotels. We're getting rid of the single-use shampoo bottles, and we're using a little reusing those. But even just that small change, one hotel chain I'm working with in the Pacific, they're saving 100,000 pieces of plastic going to landfill every year. So these are small things, but you've got to actually have the metrics around it as well. But don't say just by doing that small thing that, hey, we're plastic free, we're circular economy, we're zero waste. There's no way you're doing that yet. You talk about the small things, you report on them, but you also allude to, hey, there's a bigger challenge we're facing and we're working towards that. And really being honest about that, but also demonstrating that you're actually doing something about it too is key.
Yeah. I mean, many companies, of course, are trying to set and achieve sustainability goals. What are some common pitfalls companies face
Yeah.
that you have
Yeah,
noticed when they're
definitely.
trying to set
Yeah,
and
there are a
achieve
lot
them?
of pitfalls they face, and I think especially for an organization that's new to sustainability, they take on too big ambitions at once. They just want to try solve everything, right? Without a clear plan or to achieve them, or they might seem too vague, as you say before, like, hey, we're now net zero, or we're reducing our carbon emissions. The vagueness and so forth, and a really lack of accountability. So that's the main thing. Look at what you do, your impacts of what you do, start small but do that well, and then gain your confidence to move to other areas. So, and another challenge I see, especially in larger organizations, that sustainability becomes a siloed function rather than integrating across all aspects of the business. So, where I've seen you might have a very passionate employee that might be running sustainability program, that person might move on, might retire, might be moved to a different department, and then the whole thing falls over, right? So you haven't integrated across all parts of the business. So it's crucial to have a clear, actionable strategy that is understood and sort of really embraced at all levels in the organization.
Yeah. I read about something called Scope 3 emissions.
Yeah.
Can you speak about that and why should you care about those
Yeah,
things?
so just to take a step back, the way we measure carbon emissions is we call it by scope. So there's scope 1, 2, and 3. And very simply, scope 1 would be petrol you use in your car. So for instance, and I just sort of categorize it really loosely as things you burn, like gas, fuel, aviation fuel. In a hotel, it'd be, generators and backup diesel and so forth. Scope 2 is the carbon emissions associated with your electricity you draw from the grid. So, depending on where you are around the world, say if you're in one area I work in New Zealand, it's very heavily renewables. But when you look in places like Australia, coal-fired power stations, so there's a difference in the amount of kilowatts versus the carbon element to that. Now, Scope 3 is massive. It's hard. It's one of the hardest things to measure because it is emissions in your supply chain that are out of your direct control. So, for instance, if you're looking at in a sort of in a your flights you use, products you buy, if it goes to landfill, the methane leaching from that, the products used to make, and so forth, it goes right through, and there are actually 15 different categories around that. So but what is really interesting is that your scope 1 and 2 emissions might be someone's scope 3 emissions. So you need to you're part of a larger ecosystem, so to speak. So if you're a smaller operator of a smaller hotel, you might not think it's relevant to you, but if you've got a large corporate that is now wanting to measure their emissions throughout their whole supply chain, and that's their scope 3, they're going to be asking you what's the emissions factor, say, for each night that someone stays in your hotel, because they want to start recording that and measuring that. And in some states and jurisdictions around the world, it's now mandatory for companies to start doing that. So it doesn't matter how big you are, you sort of get captured up because you're part of someone else's supply chain. So that's the main thing
Okay.
around scope 3.
Okay, very interesting. So, what is? I read something about mandatory climate-related financial disclosures. What is that? Could you kind of
Yeah. So
break it down a little bit for some people who don't know
yeah.
that?
So what you're seeing now is various countries around the world are trying to create a level playing field to understand the climate risk of their portfolios. So, a lot of listed companies, it's mandatory in New Zealand, Australia, it's coming in the EU. UK, Singapore. China's got some elements of it, and even the US. So it's about with the annual report you do of your company, you need to identify what are your climate related risks and opportunities you have. Say, for instance, you might have a hotel chain that's on seafront. You've got to start looking at, is sea level rise going to impact that business, and what is the risk or opportunities around that? And there will be opportunities as well you know, in a different scenarios. But what you're being asked to do is look at, say, like what a 2-degree and maybe a 3-degree world looks like across your portfolio. And as you do that every year, you start getting more mature. You might start putting a financial dollar amount to these sort of things. But it's important that you identify these risks and opportunities and start actually disclosing them. So, yeah.
Okay. Then there's something called the Triple C framework for sustainability strategy. Can you explain your Triple C framework for sustainability strategy?
Sam-Erik, I suppose one of my biggest bugbears about the industry is there's so many different frameworks, and the last thing I want to do is create another one. But I just thought we needed to simplify everything. And when I work with clients and I reflect back on the 2 decades of work I've done, where I've gone unstuck and where things haven't worked out as planned, I've realized it boils down to 3 key elements that I try to do when I work with clients, or if you're thinking of embedding sustainability. First is confidence. That's the first C. So you've got to be confident to know what is your impacts, what is a carbon emission, what's your waste, what's your community. So there's a bit of work you need to do there to understand what's material to your business. So you might interview stakeholders and find out, conduct a materiality assessment. The next thing is commitments. So what are you actually going to stand for? There's no point in just saying, hey, we've got a sustainability strategy. It's about this. You've actually got to get into the weeds a little bit and saying, okay, we're going to reduce our carbon emissions by this, our waste. We want to increase the impact of our community, and we want to work with our people to maybe increase job opportunities or training and so forth around that. So you've got to make some commitments. Then the final C, which I think a lot of people let themselves down, is they don't keep it consistent. So they run off with a great news plan strategy. They have a great big show, announce it to the world, and then they don't report back on it. So there's no consistency. There's no governance around it. So what I really implore clients and people trying to get a sustainability strategy together is you at least report on it quarterly. You have people responsible in your business for that part of that strategy, and you actually do an annual disclosure of some shape or form around that. So I sort of say it's the most simplest framework, just 3 C's. So you've got to be confident, you've got to start making some commitments, and you've got to keep it consistent. And where I've really come unstuck is where I've pushed boards to go for commitments when they haven't been confident in what they're talking about. So sometimes it needs a bit of time. And I feel like the times when you try to jump ahead and rush, it costs you more in the end because you end up backtracking and so forth. So I've tried to keep it really simple. And there's just 3 parts of the book. There's a confidence part, commitment, and consistency.
And are these things now that you describe also people can read in your book, How to Build Sustainability to Your Business Strategy?
Yeah, exactly. And the idea of I want someone to pick up the book, it's a business book, right? Read it, and you can read it in 3 or 4 hours. Start asking questions, use it like a manual, and you can actually implement 2 or 3 things in a week. That's the idea. So you just start, and then you've got that there. My greatest desire is to see the book with scribbled notes in it, dog-eared and used, and so it's actually, making a difference. It's sitting by people's desks when something comes up, they can quickly refer to it and go, oh, that's what that means, and so forth around that.
Well, that's fantastic. Also now, if you who are listening to this episode, Lee is happily prepared to donate a copy of this book. And there's, of course, I need something from you who are listening to this or watching this video podcast, that write a review on the Apple Podcast, and I will put the instructions how to go about it in my show notes. And the fortunate winner will then receive a signed, personalized copy of this book. So I think this is most appreciatedly that you are doing that, because these concepts can be a little bit daunting for many people. And I think what I mentioned about the testimonial earlier was that how people are feeling that it's really a useful tool for them to get started, and mention that you would be very proud to see that it has been full of written notes and thumbed through many times that this has been well used as a tool in reaching those very important goals. So my next thing I'm interested to learn is how can business effectively conduct a materiality assessment to determine the most important sustainability issues?
Yeah, what's really important, I talk about this at the really start of the book, this is how you build your confidence. When you look at the world, you read the newspaper, listen to the news, there's so many issues that, we need to solve. And your business, your hotel, um, your your business or organization can't solve everything, not even like if you're a government, really. So what you want to do is focus on what matters the most. So you do what's called a materiality assessment. You go out to your people, your executives, ideally customers, communities and where you live. You might do some face-to-face interviews and an online survey. Sometimes it could be even short. I've done small things of just 5 or 6 people. I've done bigger things where I've gone to 30 countries with 500 stakeholders. But it's important to know what matters most to your business. And the questions you kind of ask is, we're thinking about designing our sustainability strategy, or we want to validate some things. What do you think are the most important issues we should be focusing on? And you can get a list of issues. There's some ideas in the book of what you can do. But say, for instance, on environment, should we focus on climate change, waste, uh, circular economy, energy efficiency? What are the key issues you think we should focus on? And then you might move to around social. Is it health and safety for our employees, mental health, supporting communities where we operate, and so forth, around those sort of areas. And you ask them to rank them and prioritize them. So ideally, what you come out of that materiality assessment, you get 3 or 4 key things that you are core to your business, and that's the foundation to build your strategy upon. Now, you want to revisit this once every maybe 2 or 3 years to make sure you're still focusing on the right areas. But that's can be quite as simple as setting up an online survey, sending it out. But at least it gives you that validation that you just haven't dreamt up what your key issues are, and you've tested it with the marketplace. I also find it's a really good way for a new person in sustainability to engage with your executive and board with this. So you find out what they really think of sustainability, but also engage your customers. It feels like they've got an opportunity to actually have some input in your strategy as well. So that's really important.
Very good. So, what tips do you have for distilling complex strategies into a one-page format? This is what you can be looking at on a periodical basis.
Yeah. So one of my biggest bugbears of working in this industry, we'd love to write a 300-400 page sustainability report with everything in it, and you just go, what does that all mean? How do I distill all that information to my 4,000 staff across 120 countries? What does it all mean? And so really, I try to strip away all that. That sometimes is good information to have, but the one pages would be those 4 or 5 key material things from your materiality assessment, and then you're going to look at what is your commitments around those, what is the overall vision, and then who's going to be responsible for that. So it's it's called a strategy plan on a page that I work with boards and executives that we always bring it up at the board meeting and say, are we working on these things, that the whole sustainability strategy, is it working towards something on this plan on a page? If it's not, then we need to have a separate conversation. So it keeps everyone in line, but it's something that can be put on the staff room, on internal websites, and sent out to customers as well, saying, this is what we're working on, this is our vision and goals, and try to keep it down to one page.
Excellent. That's a very, very good tip. And maybe this may be one of the most important tips that you're giving so far, because just keep it simple in the way that and concise in that one format. People talk about ESG and sustainability. Can you discuss the difference between it, and why you choose to focus on sustainability in your book?
Yeah, I suppose ESG and sustainability are coined phrases that could mean a lot of different things to different people, and so I had a crack at defining that in the book, because is a blurred line between the two. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. Was initially thought of from the finance sector about how to actually measure the impact your company of your company and overall. So it's looking at internally focused metrics around what you're doing around environment, your social, people, and governance. I view sustainability as the outer circle of that, where it looks at what is your impact of your business on the wider world as well and society as a whole. So yes, ESG is really good, and I think ESG is a good starting point because you've got to look at your own backyard first. But sustainability looks at the interconnectedness, the systems that your business operates in. So, for instance, I was in Tonga last week working with a hotel chain there and seeing how they interact with the community because they need that community for staff. They need it for food, for everything, because they're kind of isolated, a small Pacific island. So they make regular donations to local charities. They help educate their staff. They help run a scholarship fund for staff's kids to go to schools and universities and things. So they're a real part of the fabric of the community, and they're probably one of the largest employers on the island. So that's really important. If they would just focus on ESG themselves, they'll just be looking at their waste, carbon emissions, and maybe just health and safety for their staff. And they'll be missing out on some great opportunities that they can have. So really, that's the difference I see. Sustainability makes you think more broader. ESG is more looking sort of navel gazing a bit.
Yeah, what role does, the Tonga example could be very good, but what role does transparency play in sustainability efforts, and how can then take maybe learnings from what they are doing in Tonga, how can companies improve in this area?
Yeah, so as you mentioned before, greenwashing, transparency is the key. Transparency is the foundation to sustainability. And what we're doing in Tonga, we launched a sustainability strategy and plan, but I was very open about it. Said we can't solve these problems ourselves. And I spent time at the landfill. We need partnerships because there's no recycling on the island, so it's a different challenge. So I'm working with a local brick manufacturer there who will take our glass bottles and crush it and make them into bricks rather than going to landfill. So you've got to really be open about these problems, and then solutions come to you. So transparency is key. So you say, hey, here's our objective. I said, we want to get to net zero by 2040 or earlier. We want to be zero waste. Here's what we're doing now around just the plastic shampoo bottles, but we have a bigger challenge around plastic waste, glass. Food waste, thankfully, goes to local farmers, so there's no issues there. But ocean plastic's a huge issue in the Pacific. I was putting it out there saying we want to collaborate, and we're very transparent about the problems and issues we have. So that's really, really important to just be open and honest and transparent.
Very good. Another topic we all tend to talk about here in Northern Europe also is the climate change. And you have mentioned wicked problems like climate change. How can business approach these complex and systemic issues?
Yeah, wicked problems is a great terminology where you put climate change in because various actors and so forth might not know the role they play. There's no real end game to this. So it's really hard. But what you've got to think about is, first of all, acknowledge the complexity that you're in, but you realize you have to work with broader systems, not internally. So you might need to work with local and national governments. You might need to work with universities, public policies, local other industries such as waste authorities, universities for understanding new innovations and so forth. So it's key to recognize that none of these problems can be solved in real isolation. You need to actually think like a system, and the role that you play in that system and your business and your hotel is part of that. So it's really taking that sort of systems looking approach to it is really key there.
Very good. Now, there are several sustainability professionals, particularly maybe the ones who are in the hospitality industry who are watching this and listening to this episode. What advice would you give to the sustainability professionals to avoid burnout and maintain their own well-being?
Yeah, look, it's a big one, and sadly, I've faced it so many times in my career, and it's important to know that it's not all your fault. You can't take on everything. Um, you take on what you can, but it's kind of like what I sort of explain in the book. You've got to be recognize the signs and put your own oxygen mask on first, I think, because the worst thing going to happen for a sustainability professional is they get burnt out and don't go back into sustainability because there is a lack of talent, a lack of expertise in this area. It's important you stay in that game because we all need you. So I've been guilty of this in the past where I've taken on the emissions profile of half a country saying, I'm here to solve it. I'm Superman. I can do everything. And it just, you set yourself up for failure. And it's trying to be humble in that approach, but talk to your family and friends. For me, it's spending time in nature is really, really important to do that. And you will, and sadly in this industry, you will discover the best and worst of humanity, really almost in one meeting. I've seen that in one board meeting. So don't take it personally. But what I do find out, there is a really good sustainability community that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of everywhere I've worked across in the Pacific, bits in Japan and the UK. Reach out to fellow sustainability people. They know what you're going through. It's a very lonely job, but I catch up regularly for a drink with some other people, coffees and lunches, and it can be quite cathartic, but it's also a really good supporting network that I don't think I really see in any other industries. So there's a good network out there, groups on LinkedIn and so forth. But what I would just say is just try and look after yourself first as well.
Very good. Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges for businesses in advancing sustainability?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited about the innovation. So we're looking at things on how do you've got regulatory pressures coming at you, consumer the demands, but what are you going to do around the innovation? How are you going to get ahead of regulation and attract new customers and think a bit differently? So I really like what Sustainability does. It forces organizations to think a little bit different, think beyond profit. Profit's very good, but how can you be more sort of proactive in integrating sustainability operations for benefit for your customers, ideally? So really stay close to the revenue of the business. And I think understand customers are looking for more sustainable options, looking for more transparency and honesty from where they spend their money. And I think there's a great opportunity for every hotel, accommodation, and tourism itself generally to actually start really getting their head around it and looking at what they can do differently.
Yeah, and of course the travelers are savvy on social
Absolutely.
media,
Yeah.
on TripAdvisor, and
Mm.
they will congratulate you for doing the good things, and also they will be very
Yeah.
vocal if you're just trying to say something and it doesn't work out. I have an old anecdote about those staying in a resort, and the first thing I always do, I talk to the staff actually in the who are working there, and particularly it's in the community where you have potential of buying from local suppliers. So I ask those questions.
Yeah.
That what do you know where you're buying these? Let's say your fruits and vegetables from, and
Yeah.
or your fish and so on. And I mean they have nothing to hide about
Yeah.
this. So and it might be that their parents are or the families are actually
Yeah.
suppliers to the hotel. But also I think it's important to see that in hotels that we shouldn't have to offer a item such as fresh squeezed navel orange juice if you live in an area where when you really think about what it takes to bring that orange to
Correct.
your
Yeah.
squeeze it to in front of you for your breakfast. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with having if you're in Finland to have a blueberry juice
Yep.
because we can pick up the blueberries here locally. You don't have to go to Spain or Italy, and nothing wrong with the juice. I love that juice also
Yeah.
from oranges, but in reality, and I think some of the very savvy hotels are saying that we are only buying supplies that are 150
Yep.
kilometers from within the radius of the hotel, and so there are seasons where we don't have exactly what you're looking for, but then we of course we are creative
Yep.
and we're using what's available.
Yep.
So those are small things in the hotels that, and the travelers will be quite complimentary when you
Yep.
are very honest about it.
Yeah. It's definitely as part of the traveling experience, isn't it? To sample local
Yeah, it is.
produce and support local industry and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lee, this has been a very interesting conversation. And again, I'd like to remind everyone that Lee has authored a fantastic book, How to Build Sustainability to Your Business Strategy. And he kindly also will donate one book. So take the opportunity to go to Apple Podcast for the Social Hotelier channel and write a review. I will write the instructions because Apple has made it extremely complicated sometimes to even write a review on Apple Podcast, but I will write it in the show notes. So, but don't be afraid and just say what you think about this show. I mean, particularly It's always a pleasure having an expert like Lee on a segment which is so important. But I have just a couple more questions before we wrap up. One question I like to ask all my guests, besides what you have talked about, what other trends do you see happening in hospitality that hoteliers should take note of? I mean, just from your perspective.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing now, just spending a bit of time in the hotels and stuff, is that they're becoming more conscious of where their money's being spent. And because we're here in this side of the world, around the world, cost of living crisis and so forth, they want to make sure that their money goes to organizations that do good or attempting to do good. So what I'm seeing there is as more focused experience, learn, really detailed experience learning that isn't going to really adversely impact the communities that they love to visit and so forth. So a great example, Tonga last week again, but you go whale watching, you support a local community, you that's run through the hotel. It provides them with so many different jobs and a really unique experience, and you spend time with the locals there. So I think people are looking for that different type of hotel experience where you can interact and you see a hotel that's integrated with the community is actually really, really good.
Excellent. My final question is, everyone who wants to reach out to you, how can they do so? What are the channels where you can be contacted?
Yeah, so I've got
any questions or coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got an author website. It's leestewart.com.au. So it's leestewart.com.au. You can reach out on that, and also you can find that book on Amazon and so forth. But through that author website, you can drop me a message. Happy to chat, or you can search me up on LinkedIn as well. I'm always up for that conversation.
It has been really a pleasure. So thank you very much for joining this episode. Your input has been fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam-Erik. It's been a pleasure to be here. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Social Hotelier Show. Make sure to visit our website, The Social Hotelier Show, blueberry.net, where you can subscribe to the show in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, or via RSS, so you never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we appreciate a rating in Apple Podcast. Or if you simply tell a friend about the show, that will help us out too. Be sure to tune in for our next episode.